Hi, welcome everyone. Um, Thank you for joining us. My name is Christian Medina, and I want to welcome you to the Code for All 2022 Summit. And today you're joining a session called Combating Climate Change in Africa with Digital Journalism, which I'm quite excited about because in an earlier life, I used to be a journalist here in Colombia. So it's exciting to see what's happening in other parts of the world. In this session, our speakers will showcase the work of leading environmental journalism organizations in Africa and share how they're using technology to report on and fight climate change. So this will be a panel discussion. You can see already our panelists. Each speaker will present and each panelist will have a group discussion after. We'll open up the room for a question and answer period towards the end. And so feel free to send any questions you have our way. It is my understanding that our Zoom link is having some issues, but we are on YouTube Live, so please feel free to send your questions through there. And we'll try to answer the questions as best as we can during the session. So we have 4 great speakers today. Joining us, we have Tricia Govindasamy and Tolulope Adeyemo from Code for Africa. We also have Nompumelelo Mtsweni from Oxpeckers, and we have Annika McGinnis from InfoNILE. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited about this panel, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. And I hope you can all hear me clearly. And a warm welcome to this panel as part of the Code for All Summit 2022. As Christina has already mentioned, my name is Tolulope Adeyemo, and I'm a Senior Program Manager at Code for Africa. Code for Africa is a non-profit organization that pioneers open data journalism, and civic technology in Africa. I am joining you from Lagos, Nigeria, and I'll be moderating this conversation around combating climate change. And specifically, we're going to be talking about how civic tech, civil society, and the media are using technology and digital journalism to tackle climate issues in Africa. So I'll be giving the panel a chance to introduce themselves, as well as to showcase their latest project and tools that they use in climate change reporting in various African countries. So welcome everyone again. I think just to mention that for those that have joined us on Zoom, I think more people are still joining us. If you have any question, feel free to use the Q&A button down Zoom. My guess is that most of you are pretty familiar with using Zoom. So just click on the button and send your question in. So I will be checking the chat box once in a while, the Q&A box, to ensure that we're capturing everyone's questions, and I'll be sharing these questions with the speakers to respond. So without further ado, I think let's start our conversation. So I just want to set the stage by talking about climate change, which is the topic we'll be discussing today. So climate change is a very important, globally relevant problem that affects all of us, regardless of our socioeconomic status. It's such a multifaceted issue, right? And it's not just affecting one region, maybe the global south or the global south. I mean, no matter what region or industry or sector that you are, the climate emergency affects all of us. So it is inextricably linked with society, with economics, with people, with politics, people's way of life. So there are many ways we can talk about the impact of climate change. And there are also many ways that we can sort of imagine solutions to mitigate the impact of climate change. So this dialogue is intended to discuss the role of civic tech and environmental journalism organizations in combating climate change using digital solutions, open and comprehensible data to produce evidence-based reporting on the issues. So we'll start with a little bit of backstory on climate change journalism landscape in Africa. And then we will share insights into various projects that our organizations are doing. We'll share insights into our strategies, our methodologies, our technology and the tools that we're using in climate change reporting. So maybe I'll start with Tricia, or anyone can also respond to this. What is the climate change journalism landscape? What does it look like in Africa?
Okay, so I think that journalists, they are reporting on the impacts of climate change, but they're not actually using the linkage. So for example, there are extreme flooding events that are taking place, and these are seen all across Africa. So journalists are reporting on these issues, but they aren't linking in their reportage that these are possibly caused by climate change. So the impacts are seen, they're being reported on. Journalists are doing fantastic jobs by reporting on them, but the linkage is lacking.
Thanks for that insight, Tricia. Annika, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Tolu. I think I agree with Tricia. And I think that we are seeing more and more climate change coverage in the media in Africa. I've been in Uganda only for 6 years, but I've seen like increasing coverage of climate change for sure in the media. And it's basically linked to the fact that we're seeing more and more climate change related disasters or impacts like on a day-to-day. For example, we've been seeing landslides, floods, droughts, and even like just the changing rain cycles that's affecting agriculture. So these are coming out in the headlines. But one of the issues that I've been seeing is it's not reported in such an in-depth manner. So there's a lot of reporting maybe on the immediate impacts of the disasters, on more of like simplistic coverage, you could say, but not coverage that goes in depth into why climate change is happening, how these disasters are linked to what's happening globally, like what contributes to it, the expected impacts like on the everyday person, and then how people can make changes and adapt in their lives. So yeah, I think we've seen a shift in how climate is being reported, even environmental desks being started at media houses, but then we still need more in-depth reporting and solutions journalism to really, you know, make it comprehensive.
Thanks for that, Annika. Lelo, do you have any thoughts on that?
Thanks, Tolu, and welcome everyone. So like my fellow panelists have alluded to, I think climate change is an issue here in Africa. It is underreported, and the journalists that are covering climate-related issues are undersupported. I think it's still in a developing stage. Many mainstream media outlets do not cover enough on issues related to climate. It could be because maybe there's the scientific barrier behind understanding the actual concept of climate change as it is, or it could be that they're under-resourced, or there just isn't enough resources given to journalists to upskill themselves and spearhead this climate change agenda. And compared to other continents, I think maybe if we were to compare Europe with Africa, for an example, when I was in London late June this year, you could tell that climate change is something that that continent is taking seriously. When I was taking tubes underground, there are ads related to some element of climate change. In the BBC London radio station, they do have a section about climate change. Here in Africa, in our mainstream media, we don't have enough of that going on. Things like Uber Green isn't really common in Africa, whereas in London, it's easily accessible and available. So I think we still have a bit of a long way journey to go into getting there.
All right, thanks for that, Lelo. So I think it would be nice for you to share more insight into the role of media journalism in the fight against climate change. So maybe Tricia, do you want to go?
Yeah, thanks, Tolu. A lot of people in Africa, and I think around the world as well, They think that climate change is a political issue and that it should be dealt by with governments, officials, and presidents. And they feel like they shouldn't get involved. But people should get involved because climate change is going to affect everyone. It's not just a political issue. It's a socio-economic issue. It's a health issue. Eventually, it will turn into a health issue. It's an environmental issue. It's going to impact everyone. So I think that journalists now have the power to make climate change relatable to individuals, to ordinary citizens, and help them understand that this is not just for the government to deal with. It's for you as well, as an individual, to play your part and make a decision and inform yourself about climate change.
Thanks, Tricia. Lalo or Annika, do you have any thoughts on the question? Anything to share with the audience?
I think I agree with Tricia. I would just add that, we've seen the media, the role of the media is enormous in just for people to have awareness about issues, to be able to have factual information, to make informed decisions, also for policymakers and leaders. So without the correct information, we won't be able to make the right decisions in a time of crisis, in a time of change. And also there's an increasing issue with misinformation. So much information that's being passed around social media, and it's sometimes hard to distinguish what's true from what's false. But reality is we'll make decisions based on the information we consume. So the media has a huge role to play. And the question is, how do we make sure that the factual information reaches the right people and that they're aware that this is factual compared to the huge amount of misinformation they're consuming on a daily basis.
Yeah, so I think I really agree with your suggestion and your point, Tricia and Annika. So the contribution of media or the journalists to shed light on climate issues and inform public discourses should not be overlooked, right? And because I think media serve as public watchdogs, and they're able to raise awareness about those issues and advocate for solutions while working with the citizens, right, to make changes. So I know each one of you have worked on projects that have sort of contributed to tackling climate change. So, so I will give you guys opportunity now to sort of take us through some of your projects and introduce yourself. I think the audience would like to also learn more about you and your organization and some of the work that you're doing to tackling climate change in Africa. So Tricia, would you like to go first?
Sure, thanks, Tulu. I'm just going to share my screen. Let me know once you can see it.
See it.
Okay. Oh, I need to get rid of this hide floating. Oh, okay, cool. So before I go into Code for Africa, just tell you a bit about myself. So I'm Tricia. I live in a city called Durban, which is on the east coast of South Africa. So it's around here. And I come from a background in earth sciences. So I studied geology, and a lot of my modules at university level was GIS, environmental science, environmental geology, studied prehistoric climates, we studied climate change. So something about the environment and climate change has always been of interest to me. After I graduated, I was unemployed for about 8 months. And then I like to say the world of open data found me. The reason why I say it found me is because when I first landed my fellowship, I didn't know what open data was. I didn't know what data science was. I didn't know a lot about these terms, and I sort of just fell in love with it. And what I fell in love with was how data can be used for social good and how data can be used to make change. And since then, I mean, my life has just been about data and the things we can do with data. So a bit about Code for Africa. So it's Africa's largest civic technology network of indigenous labs. So if you've been joining the summit for these 3 days, you probably are a bit familiar with civic tech already. But in basic terms, what we do is we use data and tools. And with that, this helps to aid government accountability and decision-making. Our team, we have over 92 people in various African countries, and it's made up of data analysts, technologists, journalists, and designers, most in Africa and some in Europe. And then we have various networks as well within Code for Africa. So we have a Wana Data network. And the Wana Data is a woman-only network that's run throughout Africa. That's again with journalists, data scientists, designers. We have our African Drone Network, which is a network of drone operators, which is pretty cool. And then we have our Sensors Africa network, and they deploy air quality sensors. So that as well is related to climate change, as collecting air quality data, water quality data. Our PesaCheck team is our fact-checking initiative, and our iLab does forensic investigations. Okay, we have more than 100 projects in our portfolio, and these range from forensics, data and fact-checking initiatives to graphic journalism, multimedia tools, data journalism, and this is supported by bots and machine learning tools. Okay, something about CFA is that we don't just parachute in. We have in-house country teams, and when we have a project, we always have an in-house country team that implements the project, and that way the in-house country team understands the local context and therefore can now get a bigger impact. Okay, let's look at some of our projects that we've done in the past. So Code for Africa worked on a project with Global Forest Watch, and this project focused on deforestation in Central Africa. We provided training on data journalism and geojournalism to participants and offered story grants. Fellows reported on deforestation and climate change using data from the Global Forest Watch platform. Code for Africa's data analysts assisted with mentorship that included data research, cleaning up data, analyzing data, and visualization. The stories created interactive visualization and satellite imagery, as you see here. The interactive visualizations were created on a platform called Flourish. And the visualizations and satellite imagery, along with the stories, were published in national media outlets all across the region. Another very interesting and quite unique project is the COP26 War Room. So this was an international project that we participated in, and it looked at combating mis and disinformation during COP26 in Glasgow last year. And we did this by conducting high-level social media monitoring analysis. So I'm going to explain a bit more about what this means. The team monitored any anti-climate dialogue in Africa during the lead up to, during, and after the event. If there was no activity in Africa, we then worked with the international team to tackle global trends. So what did we actually do? Every morning, the team checked the social media dashboards created on Tabula that were pulling real-time data on COP26 from Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, Twitter, Telegram, and YouTube. We then pick out any high-performing content and profiles. We would then spend the next few hours further investigating the most important dialogues of the day, and then create a bulletin that was published later that evening. We will continue this project when COP27 begins as well. So an example of what we did was when South Africa was awarded its Just Transition deal of 131 billion rands. An opposition party was totally against this. So we had found out that on social media, a video was released by one of the opposition parties, sort of now saying no to this deal, that they don't want this money. And it was getting a lot of likes on Twitter, a lot of views, and a lot of shares all through social media. So we then investigated it further, and it was released in the bulletin, and a little brief write-up about what's actually going on with that. Okay. So let's look at some upcoming projects that we have in the pipeline that we've either just begun or in the process of beginning. Okay. Code for Africa, so we partnered with an organization called the Institute of Strategic Dialogue. And we've just begun a project to support fellows from African newsrooms to debunk climate denialist, delayist content that subverts public discourse or undermines democratic processes. The fellows are receiving intensive editorial mentoring from Code for Africa's PesaCheck and iLab investigators and international climate experts through webinars and workshops. The newsrooms are receiving strategic support to develop mass impact audience and sustainable business models for climate deaths. So this is something to watch out for. And now for something that's coming up that I'm super excited about, we are implementing a Wikipedia in Residence program. In this, fellows will strengthen Wikipedia user groups in Africa and reinforce the ability to peer review climate-specific content. So what we're going to do is we're going to host events, trainings, and webinars and invite all the African Wikipedia editors and volunteers and train them and teach them on how to now tackle issues such as climate denialism or delayism and related mis- and disinformation. Super excited about that. So stay tuned for these upcoming projects. Thanks, Tulu.
Thank you. Quite an interesting and impactful projects you've just highlighted. Thanks, Tricia. Lelo, would you like to tell us about the PowerTracker project that Oxpeckers is working on?
Thanks. I'll share my screen just now.
I need to unshare and I can't seem to do it. My bar is missing.
Lelo, can you share your screen? Even if Tricia is sharing.
Okay. Let me know if you're able to see my screen. Are you able to see my screen? I'm sharing.
Can you share?
Not yet.
Not
Okay,
yet.
mine is disconnected, so that's good.
Great. I'm gonna try again and share. Are you able to see my Google Sheet presentation? Great. Okay. My name is Nompumelelo Mtsweni. I'm a data journalist and associate at Oxpeckers Investigative Environmental Journalism, where my role is to manage and assist investigative journalists and data wranglers with their work. At Oxpeckers, we are a network of journalists from Africa, Asia, and elsewhere doing cutting-edge journalism under the guidance and the mentorship of South Africa's leading environmental journalist, Fiona McLeod. We combine traditional investigative reporting techniques with a new media tool to expose eco-offenses, and we've been doing this since 2012. We have developed a range of tools over the years related to environmental crimes and climate in general, but now I'll talk about PowerTracker, which is our latest project. With PowerTracker, we're trying to solve the problem of people not knowing enough about green crimes by using data journalism to inform our audience. PowerTracker is a new climate crisis program created by us here at Oxpeckers with the support of the Center for Investigative Journalism's Open Climate Reporting Initiative. Our aim is to develop a new program that would laser focus on a handful of renewable energy initiatives founded by corporations, governments, and other parties in Southern Africa. Our focus lays in the finances behind it all. So who's funding these initiatives and how is the money being spent? In order to figure this out, we worked with 5 investigative journalists to source, collate, aggregate and analyze and make available data that tracks information on the ambitions of green energy projects across the region. We also supported data-driven investigations by answering questions such as, is renewable energy just another trend or is it a real commitment? Who is funding these initiatives and how? And are these projects amounting to any real change? So why are we running this project and why now? In many parts of the world, including us here in Africa, countries are switching to less polluting renewable power sources such as solar, wind, geothermal, biomass, and hydropower. Billions are being pledged to building these resources, which led us to ask, where do these investments end up and how are they being used? So PowerTracker moves beyond raising an awareness about the threats of the climate crisis to training and supporting journalists interested in investigating green energy and its complexities. Our trainees are Sharon Chipa, who is a multimedia journalist based in Botswana, Patizwe Zulu, a freelance journalist from Eswatini, Deborah Matavu, who is a reporter at the Sunday Mail in Zimbabwe, Thabo Mulelekwa, who's a climate change journalist based in South Africa, and Sichaba Muketi, who's a managing director of the MNN Center for Investigative Journalism in Lesotho. So they're all tasked with producing an in-depth data-driven investigation that provides audiences with a better understanding of a handful of these renewable energy projects being funded across Southern Africa. So this meant combining their data and investigative reporting skills. So in the first investigation, Sichaba looked at a partnership between Lesotho's government and South African company to produce Africa's biggest wind energy project, which is worth about 15 billion USD. It was hailed as a solution to Lesotho's hefty electricity costs, and it would also mean Lesotho would no longer have to rely on South Africa for most of its energy, which still comes from coal-fired power stations. The project was abruptly abandoned, and Sichaba he has looked at how and why this has happened. This investigation by Thabo Mulelekwa looks at various renewable energy contracts provided to companies by South African government. So he collected and analyzed data to determine how much money was distributed and what progress has been done so far. So his investigation touches on how South Africa is phasing out the fossil fuels, mainly coal, and what this is actually costing. Sharon's investigation focuses on multilateral biogas project in Botswana, which ran from 2017 until 2022. And she looked at how the production and the utilization of biogas fuel for farming, for households and institutions was achieved. Deborah investigated the Zimbabwean government plan to roll out an incentive-based electric vehicle plan across the country. So she looked into the sustainability of the program, taking into account how much emissions these types of vehicles are emitting. And finally, Patizwe is still working on his investigation, which hones in on a sugar mill that supplies renewable energy to the national grid in Eswatini. He's investigating how much energy the company produces on average and assesses the environmental impacts on the nearby community. So that's all about the PowerTracker project. Grantees will present their investigations at a public webinar towards the end of November. Here, they'll get a chance to share their experiences and their findings with the wider audience. So please register for this webinar when you see the registration calls. Thanks, Tolu.
Thanks,
I'll stop
Lolo.
sharing my screen.
All right, thank you for sharing your project on renewable energy. Annika, over to you. You can go ahead and share your presentation.
Okay, I hope you can see my screen.
Yes.
I can see it.
Okay, great. So once again, I'm Annika McGinnis. It's a pleasure to be part of this event. So thank you so much for having us. I'm the co-founder of InfoNILE, and I'm a journalist from the US with interest in data journalism and environmental reporting. InfoNILE is a geojournalism platform that drives action on water, biodiversity, and environmental issues in the Nile Basin. We are an initiative of Water Journalists Africa, which is the organization under which we were founded. Water Journalists Africa is a network of water journalists across the continent, which was founded in 2011 by my colleague Frederick Mujira, who is also an environmental journalist based in Uganda. So as far as InfoNILE, we report in the 11 countries of the Nile River Basin, which you can see here, stretching from all the way, the distant source in Burundi, all the way up to Egypt. And we build the capacity of journalists in data journalism and environmental reporting. And we work with scientists to report cross-border investigations that we publish in different languages and media outlets. So these are some of the reasons why we founded InfoNILE. We see the Nile River as, it's a long water resource which stretches through so many countries and supports so many people, but it's been challenged by different environmental crises, including climate change as one of the major ones, as well as just the impacts of humans on the environment, which is causing biodiversity threats and water pollution, and leading to increasing water scarcity and also biodiversity loss. But on the side of the journalists and the information that's coming out in the Nile Basin, we see a disconnect between the journalists and the scientists, leading to more political reporting, something we talked about in the beginning of this session, and also not enough resources and training for the journalists to produce data and actionable stories on these issues. So that is why we were founded. And a bit about how we normally work. We identify an issue that has common and cross-border importance. So these are some of examples of some of the issues that we've looked at in the past, including biodiversity in different lakes in the region, plastic pollution, water scarcity, climate change, and many other issues. Then we call for pitches for journalists in our network to provide them with small story grants to do field reporting. They've published their stories across different media outlets, including radio, TV, print, and online platforms. And in recent years, we've been encouraging them to work in cross-border collaborations, either with two journalists working for different media houses or journalists in different countries reporting the same story. So then we mentor and train them, and we do this in different ways through sometimes in-person trainings that bring together the journalists from different countries. We also have been running a mentorship and training program in partnership with Code for Africa. Code for Africa has given us a lot of support, even in incubating and starting InfoNILE, and they continue to support us with data mentorship, training, and sometimes help designing our cross-border stories. So as we go through the training program with the journalists, we help them to learn the skills to make their own visualizations. Then the stories are published in their local media houses alongside the visualizations. So we try to encourage media houses that haven't ever maybe published a data visualization to do so, and to expose them to more data tools. And then we translate the stories to different regional languages to publish on InfoNILE. Finally, we bring the stories together around a similar theme, sometimes with a cross-border data source, and into cross-border multimedia projects. And these are really in-depth projects that look at the same issue across different countries, include cross-border data analysis and different kinds of geo-journalism visualizations, which can include interactive maps, drone videos, satellite imagery, and graphics. So these are some of the projects that we looked at, the different themes in the past 5 years. You can see they're quite diverse across different environmental issues, sometimes looking at photojournalism, for example. And yeah, we've published more than 300 data-based multimedia stories in more than 100 media houses since we started. So to get into how we do it, and especially how we are using technology and data to report about climate change, there's a couple of strategies that I wanted to share. So the first one, which is quite simple, but I think one of the most effective, is combining humanistic storytelling with data. So we work with local journalists who already have a wide reach in their areas and in their media houses, who are great storytellers, whether that be through video, through photography, through radio, or through text stories. And then we equip them with skills to bring these stories to a wider context and bring in the data and the science to put the stories into perspective. So for example, this is one of our Everyday Nile photo stories. This was a series of stories that we did working with photojournalists across the different Nile Basin countries. And each of them told a very human story. About half of them ended up looking at impacts of climate change, especially impacts of flooding on rivers and lakes in the region. And that was the case for this story in Ethiopia, which looked at a community in Ethiopia that has to migrate basically every year because of flooding. And then they always come back home after the floods have receded. So it was a really compelling story, but then we were able to bring it, to that wider context by bringing in the data visualization. This is a map that shows how people were affected and displaced by floods in different regions in Ethiopia, which was published alongside the story. So all of our stories include that kind of visualization and broader analysis alongside the really in-depth, compelling, and humanistic storytelling. So another strategy that we use is cross-border and collaborative reporting. And as I shared, sometimes when we give out story grants, we ask journalists to work in teams. So for example, journalists from Rwanda, Burundi, and Tanzania all work together to report on the Rusumo hydropower project, which is a hydropower project that stretches between the three countries and will impact all of those countries. So as they were doing their reporting, they were able to share resources, to share information and data, and then publish their stories in media houses in all the different countries. And this allows them to share information and actually compare and find out what is the most credible information, which is very important sometimes when you report in very political contexts. So you can compare what has been said by different leaders, which data are you getting, and really come up with a credible story. So that's just one example, but I also mentioned in the beginning that our model is to produce cross-border story projects, bigger projects that bring together the stories at the end of one of our grant cycles. This is an example of a story that we launched just 2 weeks ago, and it was done in partnership with Code for Africa. It's called Shrinking Lakes. And basically it found that many lakes in East Africa are slowly receding, reducing in depth, and drying up. And this is combined with issues with biodiversity and impacts on the fishing industry that's impacting livelihoods of a lot of people who depend on water and fish. So we worked with more than 14 journalists from 7 countries, and then the cross-border story included 7 of these case studies from 4 countries. And we also worked with data wranglers from both InfoNILE and Code for Africa to produce 17 maps and data viz that are in the story. And there's also many videos and photos and other kinds of graphics and illustrations in the story. One of the main reasons we found why the lakes are shrinking, there's basically the dual impact of climate change, but also human activities. So human activities like farming and urbanization are causing siltation, which is making the level of the lake basically rise. So even when the floods come, the lake has still receded in depth. So that's why we say that they're shrinking, even though sometimes conversely, we're seeing the flooding. So these are some of the issues that are causing this phenomenon in East Africa. These are some of examples of visualizations that we produced for the story with Code for Africa, looking at fish over the years in different lakes, for example. These are some of the original stories published that went into the project. So you can see there's an element of solutions journalism, looking at how like refugees in Uganda are restoring one of the degraded lakes, and some of the ways we visualize and present the data. This one's looking at Lake Nakuru, which is being affected by floods, and their famous flamingo population is being impacted. This story looked at Rwanda and its unique case, how even though it has so many lakes, it's not producing as much fish as the other East African countries. And you can see how we tried to show some of the science using graphics to demonstrate some of the processes that affect the fish population. And this is an example of a satellite imagery graphic to showing all the lakes in Rwanda. And then the story of Lake Wamala in Uganda, and how it has been shrinking. We used satellite imagery to show actually how the lake has shrunk. So this should be moving, but it moves and it gets smaller and then it gets bigger. So you can see the change using that satellite imagery. And we also use satellite imagery to look at Lake Manyara in Tanzania. Yeah, and yeah. So that is all about shrinking lakes. I'll post the link in the chat if anyone is interested. But just to share the final strategies of how we do climate change reporting, we've been connecting journalists and scientists using a new platform called NileWell, which we also launched in April of this year. And it's a platform that allows any journalist and scientist to create an account, to share research, to share stories, but most importantly, to find and connect with each other. Because we know that journalists sometimes don't know how to access scientists, or if they find someone online, they don't know how to connect with them. And on the side of the scientists that we've worked with, they sometimes struggle to work with journalists because they fear that their research will be misrepresented. So this is a platform to try to connect the two groups. So if you're a journalist and you log in, you can search for a scientist in your country, in maybe the field you're looking for. You can send them a message through the platform, which goes directly to their email. And maybe they'll be able to trust you more since you are a registered environmental journalist, and start the conversation there and do your interview. So this is another innovation that we have just launched, and we encourage anyone listening to me to sign up in case you have interest in this platform. And finally, we have been exploring how to bring our stories back to communities as well. I mentioned that we've done a series of photo stories, and most of them looked at climate change. So this was a story that looked at the flooding of Ripon landing site, the source of the Nile in Uganda. And it ended up winning a lot of international awards. This is the photojournalist Miriam Watsemba. She got a lot of recognition for this story. But the people who were photographed in the story had never seen the story in which was circulating around the media. So we decided to hold a community exhibition, and we brought the photos back to the community. The captions are all translated into their local language. And then the local leader there, the chairman of the landing site, engaged them in a conversation about climate change and how they feel they're being represented in the photos, what issue is being captured there, and what are they doing about it. And it also allowed us to do follow-up stories, which is very important when we report on maybe an issue like flooding. You want to go back and find out, well, what is happening next year, and what more stories need to be told, not just doing that one story. And this is the last innovation I'll share, is our chatbot, where we are trying to communicate our data stories through youth content via WhatsApp, kind of inspired by things like The Continent, how people are creating mobile magazines or mobile friendly content. So we've also been exploring creating different mobile magazines that link to our different stories and try to present information, which can be very in-depth in a more mobile friendly and digestible way. So that is the number +1 202 773 7632, and you can find most of our stories and magazines there. I hope I haven't taken too much time, but I'll end there and appreciate any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Annika, for that insightful presentation. So I see that how the projects sort of leverage data in storytelling. So can you tell us what the role of data in solving environmental issues, and how are you supporting journalists in using data for reporting? So maybe Tricia, you want to start, or Lelo?
Sure, I'll give it a go. So for me, it's quite simple and quite easy. Climate change models and predictions are basically data. And these models and predictions are very vital in actually solving the climate change issues. What we at Code for Africa is doing is we offer free training, which is online webinars. We started to do in-person trainings now that COVID restrictions have been less tight. And we also have a MOOC. And part of this Academy Africa initiative, we offer free data journalism and data literacy trainings as well.
Tricia, so just a follow-up question. So maybe you want to share like an insight into how you're working to make data more accessible to journalists, and maybe the impact that it has on the local communities.
Yeah, so we offer fellowships and grants, and we also have a network. So for example, our Wana Data network and our Hacks Hackers network. So even if they have grants or they have stories that they're working on and they need assistance from us, we are there to support them. We have a platform called Open Africa, which it's an open data platform where we liberate data sets. And we upload data sets there, and it's available for anyone to reuse. I will drop links to Academy Africa and to Open Africa.
Thank you. Lelo, do you have any thought on what's the role of data in solving environmental issues?
Thanks. So the way I see it, data gives an objective and a verifiable basis to work from when tackling any problem. So in journalism, any impactful story, especially if it is an investigative watchdog type of a project, having data is another dimension that enables fact-checking and a comparable element. Here at Oxpeckers, we always add a data journalism element to the way we conduct our programs and training. So in each of our programs, we make sure there is a specific training focused on data, because we are aware that most journalists out there do not have the skills to work with data. This has happened with our Wild Eye project, where an expert was hired to train a team of journalists who were turning to data wranglers, and I was one of them, to work comfortably with data. And then now, even with the PowerTracker, we have Adam Oxford, who is a strategist and a very strong data personnel to train other journalists to work with the data. All the 5 grantees have undergone a thorough training with him. So with all the programs that we're rolling out, we make sure that data is at core. We're spearheading the ability to make sure that journalists are comfortable with working with data, and they're able to use it to tell their stories.
Thank you, Lelo. So maybe you want to share any other lessons or insights or suggestions from your projects or practical experiences that you've shared. So Annika, is there anything you want to share in terms of lessons, insight from the various projects that InfoNILE is executing in Africa?
Yeah, thanks, Tolu. I think the main lessons I wanted to share are, one, the power of collaborations, and this can be done in many different ways. And it's something that sometimes is hard for journalists. Like, I think we are taught to go out and be maybe like a one-man or one-woman army journalist and do everything ourselves and then publish the story with our byline. But nowadays, we can make such a much greater impact when we collaborate. So we can do this, between old and new media. It doesn't have to be only new media. We can still work with the radio stations and work with media that has a wide reach, and then combine our skills. This can be done through bringing together like the data analysts and the storytellers, collaborating between scientists and journalists, journalists and activists, journalists in different countries, just thinking of new ways that we can work together and do something bigger. Secondly, we shouldn't forget about solutions journalism, especially when looking at climate change. It can be very depressing, especially when we just put out negative projections and news all the time. So we need to really emphasize what is working and also present that in a data and evidence-based way. And then, yeah, finding ways to also to take our stories back to communities and do follow-ups. And yeah, finally, don't forget that data is about people. So we need to combine the human stories with the data, and don't overload your story with data, but find maybe that one data point that really speaks to the message of your story, and have it bring out whatever human story you're trying to convey. So those are my few insights. Thanks, Tolu.
Thank you so much. I totally agree with you. I think cross-sector partnership is really important, especially when we want to solve social problems, because so looking at climate change, it doesn't just affect the sector, it affects everyone. So ability to have different sectors, different stakeholders involved in tackling the issue is very, very key. Lelo or Trisha, do you have any thoughts on the question I just asked?
Yeah, so I would say that climate change is affecting a lot of people, and there's people out there with really, really powerful stories. So I would say just don't report on the models and predictions and heavy data. Get a human side of your story. Bring a face to that person. Annika mentioned, I think it was in Ethiopia, where people have to move away during periods of flooding and then come back to their homes. InfoNILE does this really well, where they really bring a human face to the story. So remember, climate change is a lot about the data and the predictions and the models, but don't make your story just about that. Bring your human aspect to it.
That's very important. Thank you, Tricia. Lelo, any other lessons, insights, or suggestions from your projects?
Yes, so as at Oxpeckers, we've had a lot of journalists from different projects having issues with getting data from government officials. So lessons from there have always been to be persistent with going out there and getting the data itself. They've got a lot of pushbacks. Oftentimes when they try to set up a meeting with an official to get specific information, could be a data, it could be an interview, anything that relates with the story or whatever it is that they're reporting, it has been incredibly hard. So lessons took from there have always been around form networks of other people within your field who are trying to fight against the same cause, and then get some form of support from them. That's why we have our community of practice. So when you visit our Oxpeckers website, there is a very important resource there. It's just heavily packed with all forms of lessons from other people in the past who have tried to gather information, what they've learned, what their struggles are. So like Annika has said, when you are pursuing it alone, it could be a bit of a challenge, have a team. And also, as Trisha had said, put an element, a human element to that data.
Yeah. So just one thing that came to mind when you were talking about humanizing data and storytelling. So I totally agree with that. I think it's very important for journalists who will be reporting on climate change to have proper knowledge on the facts and focus on how this issue is impacting people who are the most vulnerable, and being able to sort of reframe their reporting accordingly in a more, in a people-centered way that makes the citizens both aware and as well as empowered to take action. So yeah, I just want to echo that. So I think we have 4 minutes left, but are there any unique challenges facing environmental and climate journalists in Africa? And how can civil society organizations or government or other stakeholders sort of mitigate these challenges? Lelo, would you like to go?
Yes, so this ties back to some of the lessons I talked about. So I guess it is, sorry, I forgot what you just asked me now. I was about to answer, then it slipped my mind. Repeat the question.
Okay, so I was asking if there are unique challenges that maybe
yes, thanks. You're talking about
projects. Okay, yeah.
Right. So challenges has always been pushbacks, all of them, different projects, whether it's about climate change, whether it's about finding wildlife crime, whether it is about finding issues about mine outlets, for an example. It's not easy to get the information, and it's often in the government spaces. So if the government can make it easy and make the data accessible, if they've got data sets, make them open to the public, we should be able to just access it. And, it should be easy. It shouldn't be a thing that requires a lot of effort, a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of attention, so it's incredibly hard so far. A lot of journalists often report on how stressful it can be. I myself have also been in those positions before. So these different people who have the data we want, they should make it a bit easier. They should take into account that there's some reporting to be done to the public, and they are serving the public, so they should allow that communication to happen.
Thanks, Lelo. Tricia, do you have any thoughts on the question I just asked?
Yeah, 100% agree with Lelo. And something I'd like to add is a lot of these government reports and policies that are being released are sometimes a bit too technical. So if government officials can connect with science communicators or science journalists to sort of now simplify that context, that will allow grassroots organizations or grassroots newsrooms to actually report that information much more easily.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I think the scientific terminology that is being used for climate change is quite ambiguous, which could sort of result to misunderstanding and unintentional spread of misinformation. So yeah, totally agree that so like the media stakeholders as well as the government should work together with climate expertise in helping to ensure that the terms that are being used are more simplified for laymen to understand how they, understand the context around the climate change. Yeah, totally agree on that. Annika, do you have any thoughts, anything you want to share?
Yeah, totally agree with what has been said. I think I would add we need more investment in environmental and climate journalism because it takes a lot of resources to go to the field, to do really in-depth stories where you get, the experiences of people who are impacted by climate change. It's more than just going to a press conference and reporting about what the minister has said. And that's one of the issues that we see that leads to politicized reporting is maybe a lack of resources to do these in-depth investigations. So we need more resources delegated to climate reporting on the part of the media houses and media development organizations and just in general to have better stories.
Thank you so much, Annika. So I'm going to be checking the chat box now to see if we have any questions. Please feel free to drop in your questions for our speakers and we'll be happy to respond to them. Tricia, Lelo, Annika, is there anything else you want to share, maybe about your work or, yeah, and then we'll see if there's any questions from the folks. Okay.
Not really, just appreciate the input by Tricia and Lelo. Really great projects that you're doing. It's nice to hear about them.
Awesome. All right. Let's see if we have any question. Okay, so there's a question here from Justin Kawisha. So I'm going to just read it out. It says, my name is Justin Kawisha, senior producer from the Zambia National Broadcasting Corporation, specialized in climate change, environmental protection, human interest, and underreported stories. Climate change stories are not found in the offices where most reporters and producers go to gather political stories. They require resources, time, and skills to investigate and gather, but are not supported in most cases. Are there organizations that can fund or support media projects on climate change and also build or sharpen the skills of reporters and producers so that they can be able to produce impact-based reports? So it continues, I'm asking so because I always use my personal equipment and logistics for all the reports that I've done, which have even necessitated the creation of ministry to look into matters of climate change in Zambia. So the question is, are there organizations that can fund or support media projects on climate change? And he's also asking how we can build or sharpen the skills of reporters and producers so that they can be able to produce impact-based reports. So I'm going to let Annika answer the first part of the question, and then I will let Tricia maybe give some impact or insight into organizations that are supporting media organizations in capacity building efforts. Yeah, over to you, Annika.
Yeah, thanks for the question. There are some organizations you can check out. I was just trying to list them. Definitely Earth Journalism Network gives out story grants on a lot of environmental journalism. I think International Media Women's Foundation as well. Just trying to think of the other ones. Pulitzer Center, you can apply for like larger story grants. InfoNILE, we usually sub-grant, so we get grants and then we sub-grant to journalists, but not in Zambia, unfortunately. But maybe through Water Journalists Africa, they'll have other opportunities. I don't know if Tricia has some other recommendations.
Yeah, at Code for Africa, we do have project specific grants, and that is location based as well. So currently that I know of, there isn't any for Zambia, but if you join our networks and our communities, you'll be in touch. So just follow us on Twitter, and all of our grants and fellowships are awarded during that. And of course, I've shared the link to our MOOC, and you'll be able to get access to free courses. But yeah, follow us on Twitter for updates on grants and fellowships.
All right. Thank you, Tricia, Lelo, and Annika, for sharing your experience and deep expertise on this topic, which is so vital for all our futures. And thank you, everyone that joined this section. And I hope you all found the discussion quite valuable. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
And just one quick message before we go, and from Code for All, I'd like to extend our thank you to all the panelists, as well as, I learned a lot, and I saw a lot of commonalities with the experiences in different parts of Africa with my own experiences here in South America and Colombia. And then for those participating and those in the audience, I really encourage you to follow the rest of the summit. Visit the YouTube channel that Code for All has to see other sessions. I was mentioning there's a great one on digital authoritarianism in Venezuela that I think applies in different contexts as well. And I'm dropping all those links in the chat right now. So feel free to follow that, follow the Slack channel. And once again, I'd like to thank Tolu, Tricia, Lelo, and Annika for all their help, and Mariana in the background for Code for All that's been helping with some of the tech stuff. So thank you all, and I wish you a great day or night, wherever you are.